Hello, my name is Bogdana Rakova, and I'm joining you today from the unceded territories of Ramaytush Ohlone Indigenous Peoples, San Francisco, California. I'm really excited to be here and share with you about our paper, Where Responsible AI Meets Reality, Practitioner Perspectives on Enablers for Shifting Organizational Practices. This is joint work with my collaborators, Jingying, Henriette, Cramer, and Rumman Chowdhury. The past few years have culminated in a transitional moment for responsible AI moving into practice. As Hannah Wallach, partner research manager at Microsoft, shared recently, many organizations have responsible AI principles, but turning these principles into practice is a challenging task that, at its core, requires a fundamental culture change. Recently, there have been a number of algorithmic auditing frameworks proposed by the research community. Raji et al. Provide an overview of the context of an internal algorithmic audit conducted during product development and prior to launch. A report by the Ada Lovelace Institute and DataKind UK clarifies the terms around algorithmic audits and impact assessments, providing a taxonomy of where the different kinds of audits originate, including social science audit studies, financial audits, environmental impact assessments, data protection, and policy impact assessments. The main research questions we wanted to focus on in this work were first to bring more clarity to the gaps between academic research priorities and what practitioners need in practice. Then secondly, to investigate what does it take for organizations to translate academic research into implementation. Based on prior work, we've seen that organizations are differentially successful at responsible AI work. Our hypothesis was that structural factors exist that enable or discourage responsible AI work. And then the goal for this study was to find enabling organizational factors that catalyze progress. Drawing from the work in organizational science, we start this exploration by revisiting what organizational theorist Wanda Orlikovsky called the duality of technology in organizations. That is, technology is physically constructed by actors working in a given social context, while at the same time, technology is socially constructed by actors through the different meanings they attach to it. We further leveraged Orlikovsky's structurational model of technology, comprising the following components: human agents, who are the technology designers, decision makers, users, and others. Then technology in terms of technical artifacts. And lastly, and what we focus mostly in our work, institutional properties of organizations, including business strategies, control mechanisms, ideology, culture, division of labor, standard operating procedures, communication patterns, as well as outside pressures such as governmental regulation, competitive forces, vendor strategies, professional norms, and other socioeconomic conditions. Building on prior work in the field of algorithmic auditing as well as organizational science, we wanted to understand the impact of organizational structure on the success of responsible AI work in industry. Over the course of 7 months, we conducted 25 interviews with practitioners in industry. The questions in the semi-structured interviews were also reviewed by industry organizational psychologists, and a total of 81 questions were included. Key criteria for the participants in the interviews was that they need to be actively involved with AI auditing work within the organization, and their work should have an impact on real products and services beyond the research. We investigate practitioners' perceptions of their own role, the evolution of their responsible AI-related work over time, how the work is situated within the organization, how responsibility and accountability for the work are distributed, the organizational performance review process and incentives, And lastly, we explicitly ask practitioners what desired aspirational future state they wished for their work within the organization. Using the data from the semi-structured qualitative interviews to compare across organizations, we describe prevalent, emergent, and aspirational future states of organizational structure and practices in the responsible AI field. 4 themes emerged from our conversations with practitioners, and all of them were patterns, transitions towards the aspirational future state of responsible AI work practices. We go through them in the next few slides and invite you to read the paper for the full details. Based on what practitioners shared, we identify 4 major questions that organizations must answer as they implement AI auditing and responsible AI initiatives at scale. These are: what and how do we do, when and how do we act, how do we measure success, what are the internal structures we rely on, and finally, how do we resolve tension? We found that most commonly practitioners have to grapple with lack of accountability, ill-informed performance trade-offs, and misalignment of incentives within decision-making structures that are only reactive to external pressure. Emerging practices that are not yet widespread include the use of organization-level frameworks and metrics, structural support, and proactive evaluation and mitigation of issues as they arise. One of the biggest challenges practitioners reported was that as the responsible AI is scaling up in the organization, ethical tensions are identified, and then it would happen that overly rigid organizational incentives may demotivate others in them, compounded by organizational inertia, which sustains those rigid incentives. For the future, interviewees aspire to have organizational structures that invest in anticipating and avoiding harms from the products. Also, they would redefine results to include societal impact, integrate responsible AI practices throughout all parts of the organization, and align decision-making at all levels with an organization's mission and values. Finally, we present the outcomes of a workshop where attendees reflected upon early insights of this study through structured design activity. Practitioners recommended that we need to create video ability across organizational levels. We would need to coordinate internal and external pressures, build robust communication channels between and within levels of an organization, and finally, design initiatives that account for the interdependent nature of the responsible AI work practices we have discussed. In summary, we look at these prior patterns of how organizations are implementing AI auditing practices, and we see that internal actors have to decide when and how to act, how to reframe success, how to orient within organizational structures, and how to resolve tensions between internal and external incentives. Our key takeaways include that organizations need to scaffold their practices to get to an aspirational future. Transitions are not linear. Rather, they represent persistent steps in coalition building. For internal actors to be successful, external actors need to exist. And lastly, responsible AI needs more than one-time audit studies. Systems thinking and organizational insights are needed to create long-term structures and roadmaps to address organization-specific barriers and drivers. With that, I want to thank you for listening. We invite you to read the paper and reach out to us with your feedback and ideas of how you could apply it in your work and research and what we could do better. Thank you.